And how did you end up deciding? I often told people when I talked about my background that I had absolutely zero intention of becoming a lawyer and zero intention of doing anything in the restructuring or distressed investing world, right? It all happened to me rather than it being a grand plan. Did you have a grand plan about bankruptcy and restructuring and distress? Or how is it that you thought about this when you were at U Miami?
Well, first of all, I laid awake at night thinking and dreaming about bankruptcy. Actually, I graduated law school in 1982, and in 1981, I took a bankruptcy course, and this is how the professor taught it. We have no idea what this is all about. Let's take a vote what you think will happen when it goes to the court. That's literally how I learned bankruptcy.
Hello there, M&A Advisor community. This is Roger Aguinaldo, and welcome back to the M&A Advisor podcast. Since 1998, the M&A Advisor's mission is to recognize achievements, provide thought leadership, and connect professionals in mergers and acquisitions for the purpose of improving your deal-making craft and accelerating your deal flow. We are so glad you're joining us for this insightful and inspiring podcast conversation curated for mergers and acquisitions professionals. Whether you're an aspiring deal maker, a seasoned professional, or just curious about the world of mergers and acquisitions, you'll find something valuable and relevant in our podcast. Our goal is to bring you the best insights, stories, and tips from the experts who've been there and done that, so you can learn from their successes and mistakes and take your deal-making skills to the next level. But before we dive into today's episode, we have a small favor to ask you. If you enjoy listening to our podcast and find it useful, please consider following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and subscribing to our M&A Alerts newsletter. You can find the links in the description below. This will help us reach more people like you and grow our community of M&A professionals. It will also let us know that you appreciate our work and want us to keep producing more quality content for you. Plus, you'll never miss an episode, and you'll always be in the loop with the latest trends in the M&A world to improve and accelerate your deal making. So please follow us. You are the reason we do what we do, and we couldn't do it without you. And now for today's podcast.
Been a little more intense and maybe a tad more prepared, he could have been a contender. And on that cheerful and uplifting thought, I give you my partner and friend, Jack Butler. Thanks, Greg. So one of my great pleasures each year is to have the opportunity to help recognize and honor individuals who've made truly remarkable contributions to the distressed investing, turnaround, and insolvency communities. One common attribute among those when we reach out from M&A Advisor to inform them of their selection for a leadership or a lifetime achievement award and their induction into M&A's Hall of Fame is they don't seem to get it. Their common reaction is, really, me? Is there a financial commitment involved? Right? What did I do for this recognition? Why are you choosing me? And it's not false humility, because from their perspective, they're simply doing what they do. It's been their approach to their personal and professional lives their whole lives. Nothing special. They're just sort of getting on, doing the things that they do. Well, tonight, we're going to honor three individuals for their contributions to the communities. Right there, right over there, I'll point to Laurel over there. First, start with her. She's Judge Laurel Isicoff of the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of Florida. Right next to me is Lisa Donahue, the co-head of Americas and Asia, partner and managing director for AlixPartners, and they're going to receive M&A Advisor's Lifetime Achievement Awards. Although they both told me they are far too young to have a Lifetime Achievement Award, and they prefer to get the Leadership Award that Dave's getting. And Dave Miller, who's an equity partner, a senior portfolio manager, and the head of U.S. Restructuring, and a member of the management committee at Elliott Investment, he's going to receive M&A Advisor's Leadership Award. And tonight, we'll all get dressed up fancy, and we'll talk about those things, and they'll have an opportunity to speak with each of you about their perspectives and share their awards. Today, though, we get to do something that I think is special. We kind of go behind the curtain and we want to talk to them kind of about how they got here. I mean, we all understand what they've done. I consider them to be iconic in their contributions to the community. They say not so much, but the reality is all three of them hold really unique positions and have done some pretty extraordinary things. But you know what? They all started out as kids. They all had to figure out how to get into college. They all had to figure out what to do with their lives, and they all had to, as we all do, if we're all honest about it, there's no part of a life that is a straight line. We navigate our lives and go from point to point, and react to things as we go. And this is an opportunity to get to talk a little bit about that. So we're going to have a conversation here, and I invite them to jump in and talk with each other as we do this. But we're going to spend the next hour with you sort of getting you the opportunity to have kind of some rare insights into who Laurel, Lisa, and Dave are, how they got there, what they believe, what makes them passionate, what they care about, and why they do what they do. So Judge Isicoff, I'm going to start with you. I've known Laurel for a long time, and so I should call her in this public setting judge. So I'll try to remember to do that because she does deserve that honor. She has done really remarkable things on the bench, and we're all the better off for it. But I want to start at the beginning, right? And maybe at the beginning, before 2006, for that part of this conversation, maybe I will call her Laurel, because she started out in New York. She's a New Yorker, right? She had a Broadway mom, a dad who was a theater manager, and a grandfather who was an in-house, really very strong and capable counsel at CIT Group, who, among other things, found his way to the Supreme Court for an argument or so. And, so I wanted to start, if I could, Laurel, with you, sort of say, how does someone sitting there in New York trying to figure out what to do when you grew up in the Broadway world sort of say, I think I want to be a lawyer?
Well, first of all, Jack, thank you very much for nominating me, and thank you all for including me today. Yes, my mother was a Broadway star. My father was also in theater, but you heard that my grandfather was a lawyer, and I wanted to do whatever my grandfather did except golf. He loved to golf, and perhaps it's because he lost an eye playing golf that I wasn't encouraged to do that. But in all other things, I wanted to do what my grandfather did. And besides which, think about it. If you are a child of theater parents, what is the best way to rebel against your parents? You either become an accountant or a lawyer. So I picked law.
So, and one of the things that you started out, and I was wondering, how does a New Yorker, right, just like how does a New Englander end up with all the ties to Florida that the two of you have? In your case, it wasn't too complicated, Laurel. It was Stephen, right?
It was Stephen. My husband owns a scrap yard. He's over there. And believe it or not, you cannot move scrap yards from Florida to New York. So if I wanted my husband, I had to move to Florida, so I did.
So NYU law becomes Miami law?
That's exactly right.
And how did you end up deciding? I mean, I often told people when I talked about my background that I had absolutely zero intention of becoming a lawyer and zero intention of doing anything in the restructuring or distressed investing world, right? It all happened to me rather than it being a grand plan. Did you have a grand plan about bankruptcy and restructuring and distress, or how is it that you thought about this when you were at UMiami?
Well, first of all, I laid awake at night thinking and dreaming about bankruptcy. No, actually, I graduated law school in 1982, and in 1981, I took a bankruptcy course, and this is how the professor taught it. This is a new code. We have no idea what this is all about. Let's take a vote what you think will happen when it goes to the court. That's literally how I learned bankruptcy. So I had no interest in bankruptcy. I clerked on a state appellate court. We had an automatic stay issue, and all of us, including me, who took bankruptcy, were running around trying to figure out what the hell the automatic stay was and what it had to do with seizing the car. So that was my introduction to bankruptcy. But I went to Squire, Sanders, and Dempsey, and I was in the Miami office, and at that time, I had a friend who was working on a bankruptcy with the late Chris Meyer, who was my mentor and dear friend until he passed last year. And she decided to leave the firm. And she said to me, you know, you really should try bankruptcy because it's a unique field. You can hold yourself out differently in this very large law firm and you can succeed. And so even though I was already doing asset-based lending, I was also doing M&A work already. You know, you're the young associate in the office. You literally do whatever the partners ask you to do. I started to work on this bankruptcy case with Chris. And after that, I was hooked. And because of my background in real estate and corporate work and other asset-based lending and bankruptcy, I ended up being a workout specialist.
So you did all that. You spent, I think, 8 years at Squire Sanders, something like that. Then you went on to another law firm, and you became an expert. And it's always interesting to me when people become experts in certain things. You became an expert in like SEC receiverships, right, and Ponzi schemes and things like that. How in the world did you all of a sudden? Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you didn't like wake up, in the morning and have this, epiphany saying, I'm going after SEC receiverships. What is it that led you to that? Because I think that informed a lot of your kind of legal preparation heading into the place you are now. So tell us a little about that.
Well, yeah, again, I laid awake at night dreaming about SEC receiverships. No, I happened, after I took a year and a half off from practicing law, I actually thought I retired from the practice of law. I ended up going back to a law firm called Kozak, Tropin, and Throckmorton. And my law partner, Harley Tropin, became appointed as receiver in a premium sales corporation, which was a huge Ponzi scheme. And he also became the Chapter 11 trustee. And so that was how I got involved in that. And I continued working in those types of cases with my partners. Ultimately, at one point, I was chosen by the SEC to serve as a receiver. The district court judge felt differently, which was probably a good thing because Bobby Martinez, who became a very good friend, this was the mutual benefits Ponzi scheme. We went in the night before the raid because, as you know, for those of you who've done these types of things, you go in, you take over, everybody goes into the conference room, you image the computers, et cetera, et cetera. And so Bobby picked up the phone and called the U.S. attorney and said, I need a few marshals to help tomorrow. And I said, you know what? Laurel Isicoff could never have made that phone call. But that was how I got into receiverships and Ponzi schemes. And what we really focused on in all the Ponzi schemes that I worked on was working through how to coordinate when there was a bankruptcy and a receivership or a criminal action, and usually all three, as you know, for those of you who are involved in Ponzi schemes, clarifying to everybody, but my involvement was always from the legal end. But in any event, that was how do you coordinate all of those different things happening? And so what I found interesting as I went through these processes was working on how to coordinate bankruptcy plans with class action plans, how to coordinate restitution plans with bankruptcy plans. And it was a very interesting process, but that's how I did it.
So I'm going to push the pause button for a moment because you made a comment which I really want to explore because I know the backstory to it, and I think it's something that's worth sharing. You said you thought you'd retired from the practice of law. So here you were, somebody who had graduated from Miami, had a 2-year clerkship with a judge, a great experience there, 8 years at Squire Sanders, and then you pushed the pause button. Can you share a little bit why that was?
Well, my oldest son, who has since is passed away, my oldest son had ADHD, and in those days there was a very, very serious problem. Unfortunately, we still have it now with childcare. And I made the decision that it was important for me to stop working so that I could be with my son. And so I left the practice of law so I could take the time to be a parent and try to figure out ways to help that child who was struggling at the time. Ironically, I went back to work because of a lack of health insurance options. So I guess it all worked out in any event.
It's interesting because I think, you have 3 children. John and I have 4 kids. Your kids inform your lives in many, many ways. And I think, and we've had conversations about this in the past, and, Greg had a chance to introduce me to, and Greg and I co-led the Skadden's practice for a year, and then with Jake Hoffman, we spent a lot of time talking about how do you deal with, women in the law. How do you deal with people who are, not that you shouldn't be concerned about the guys, but how do you deal with people who have kids and concerns and they're trying to raise children? We had a partner come to us at one point saying, I'm a single mom. I have a 13-year-old. I need to take some time off to do that. I don't want to actually not practice. I don't want to give up my partnership. What do I do? And how do you do this? And by the way, if you make me choose, there's no choice, right? So don't make me choose, right? And I think the profession and our community continues to struggle with that today, right? I mean, we haven't, decades and decades and decades of doing with all this stuff, we haven't solved those problems. And I just think it's interesting, for you to share how that kind of informed your life, because that's a big step in your life, right? You end up coming back for practical reasons and on to what you've done now. So as I said, all of our lives have kind of twisting turns. So we'll stop there for a little bit and go to Lisa and Dave, who, by the way, have something in common. I was trying to remember, Lisa, did you ever work anywhere before other than AlixPartners in your career? Because I know you've been there for like 27 years. So
I have been there almost 27 years. Yeah. I did. I worked at a firm called Boston Financial doing asset-based lending. And I got into restructuring because one of my deals went very bad. And I had to figure out how to get the assets back. I didn't even understand that there was a profession and that there were people that did this for a living, not just the lawyers, but my side, the business people that deal with the operations, figure out what to do, how to do it. So I kind of, you talk about this long and winding road. I kind of stumbled into this as a career. So I was, I was a lender for a couple of years before I moved into this.
And Dave, you've been at Elliott Management from right out of school, from the jump, haven't you? Were you there anywhere earlier?
Almost. I spent about 1.5 to 2 years at a firm that at the time was known as the Peter J. Solomon Company, in working in their financing and M&A restructuring advisory groups. And then right after that, I came to Elliott Management.
So there's both of you a year or two someplace else, and then at the place you stayed. But that makes you different than a lot of other people in the sense that there's so many people that are transient that move around from place to place. So I'm going to ask Dave, you first, and then Lisa, why have you spent your whole careers at the same place? Obviously, it's because you enjoy what you're doing, but I just want to get a sense of it.
One or the other.
Dave?
I mean, as you say, I really enjoy what I'm doing, and the people that we've managed to assemble, it's just an unbelievable group of colleagues. And it's a very, kind of collaborative and collegial environment that I think is differentiated to some degree in the investment management industry. A lot of firms, it's almost like an F1 team, where your stiffest competition is the other car, like on your team. We take a different approach. It's very team-based. I also think there's a tendency for people to think, the grass is greener on the other side. And I've seen probably in my time more people that are happy somewhere, and when they leave, I think it's like over 50% that they regret making that move if they were already happy. Now, if they're unhappy, they should absolutely be moving. But if you're in a good, situation, working with people you've worked with for many years, you've embedded a lot of, trust, mutual trust. I think you really need to think carefully about walking away from something like that.
So, Dave, for perspective, when you started out at Elliott, what were the assets under management roughly, if you remember? And I know it was a long time ago, but roughly what was it?
$3 billion.
$3 billion. And what is it today?
Around $75 billion.
So a little bit of growth. Now, Lisa, when you started AlixPartners, I've known, as Lisa knows, Jay Alex and I were friends from a point in time when Jay was Jay Alex and an associate, a guy named Larry Ramakers at the time, and they on the letterhead it said certified public accountants, right? So that was when we worked 2 miles from each other in Michigan, right? And Lisa, when you started with AlixPartners, how many people were at AlixPartners, roughly, if you can remember?
I can remember because I talk about it a lot, actually. I was employee number 59. And we now have 3,700. Revenue was about 80 million. Now we're 2.5 billion. We had three offices, Detroit, Chicago, and New York. And now we've got 27 offices. So we've grown a tremendous amount during that time. And back to your point about staying for so long, I think one of the things about a career like mine is when you look at how, if you're in the turnaround group at AlixPartners and you do interim management, which is what I do, you get seconded to companies. So yes, I've been at AlixPartners for that long, but I also spent, 2.5 years at Westinghouse, 3 years at Exide Technologies, 3 years on the island of Puerto Rico running their power plants, 3 years at Calpine, 2 years at Atlantic Power. So what ends up happening is, yes, you still have the affiliation and the great people and just the support network of the firm, but what you also have is little mini careers that happen in it that keep the intellectual challenge, the variety, and the growth and learning, which is what I think is really important in a career.
I agree with that. I think similarly at Elliott, when you at a firm that reaches a scale and a level of diversity that it's involved in a lot of different businesses, a lot of different situations, it provides for a very kind of varied experience where you're constantly being exposed to new things, you're constantly learning. When you have that type of a situation, it's very difficult to leave it.
Well, and Judge Isicoff, you joined the bench in 2006, if I remember something along that line, became the chief judge, the first woman chief judge of the Southern District of Florida in 2016, a decade later. And you've seen a lot in that period of time, and since your time on the bench, right? Some 19, almost 20 years on the bench. We all talk, and we talk, I always like talking to bankruptcy judges about their consumer dockets, because I think people don't pay enough attention to consumer bankruptcy and the things that are important there. And it's a really important part of our economy and our world. And we don't pay attention to it. And when you look at the human suffering that goes on in the consumer system, because people don't voluntarily file consumer bankruptcy, much like people think they do. It's not an escape. It's a reality, oftentimes driven by medical bills and other challenges in life. So, you've got that part of it, but you also have the commercial part and the business part. And the Southern District, under your leadership, has had its fair share cases of large cases too. So can you just take a minute and talk about kind of the evolution of the Southern District in the 19 or so years you've been on the bench?
And thank you, Jack, for calling the correct Southern District the Southern District.
We just had a debate on the Southern District because I incorrectly, it turns out, referred to the Southern District of New York just as simply the Southern District, and then geographically and practically, the Southern District of Florida is the Southern District.
Yes, look at a map.
I stand corrected.
Look at a map. Okay. Any event, so it's interesting. When I first went on the bench, the Southern District of Florida had some very large, significant Chapter 11 cases, all very exciting. Of course, having been a Chapter 11 practitioner my entire professional life, the only consumer work I ever did was pro bono. As a matter of fact, the first time I had a consumer docket, I spent half the time praying that I didn't make the wrong decision, which I probably did, but it doesn't matter. But we had a very interesting cases. And then that started to shift. Of course, in 2010, when all of the problems hit, there weren't a lot of reorganizations going on anyway. So the Southern District of Florida now is starting to get some very interesting and exciting large Chapter 11 cases, but we also have a lot of Subchapter 5 cases. Subchapter 5, the Southern District of Florida is the second busiest jurisdiction in the country. In Subchapter 5 cases, the Middle District of Florida is the busiest. And so Subchapter 5, the small businesses in Florida have really seen an upsurge in the opportunities to reorganize. But the most important thing that has happened with the Southern District of Florida, I think, is the changes on the bench. Where I'm now, I say to Bob Mark, he and I are the old people on the bench. We have some very interesting lawyers who had very sophisticated business corporate practices before they went on the bench, including Eric Kimball, Mindy Mora, Coralie Lopez Castro. And we've also seen, as I said, more and more larger Chapter 11s coming that we've been able to participate in the organization. And the interesting thing is that some of the issues have changed over the years in terms of Chapter 11 and the way it's driven. Some of it is the issues of private equity and the role that private equity plays, in particular Chapter 11s, more so now than when I first went on the bench. Another is the rise of merchant cash advance and how that's impacting. But the court as a whole has become more technologically sophisticated. We have, as I said, judges that are very, very recently involved in the corporate world and mergers and acquisitions. And we're very fortunate to have them on the bench. And they also happen to be very nice people, although those of you who practiced before them may not agree all the time.
So I think one of the things, the themes that sort of comes out when we all talk about our experiences and our kind of our journeys is we're all multitaskers, right? In the fact that, and I think that's one of the things that drives us to this business a little bit, in the sense that, Dave, you talked about you're working on, you live the deal you're in, you go and live with the company, right? You're running Puerto Rico, you're doing the things that you're doing, right? I actually think it's true on the bench, right? There are, every time you step up there, you're dealing with the moment of the case in front of you. And some of them are very large cases, and some of them, and have a life of their own. And some of them you spend, a few minutes on, and because it's a different docket. And so I think we all do that kind of multitasking. And I guess the thing I'd like to, is you think about that, each of you in your own ways have been responsible for helping to build the businesses you're in. Right. And I really want to talk about you because, it takes a village to make a company go from 59 million to 2.5 billion in revenue. Right. And I've always, my friend Jay, I've always viewed as being a visionary. He's an extraordinary individual, but, by himself, no matter how phenomenal he is. And if he were here, he'd say, no, I could have done it. But no, he couldn't do that. It was a team he built. You being one of them, and your colleagues, and you've kind of had I guess I'd say it's both the privilege, you earned it and you worked for it, but you've had the privilege of being in that kind of upper tier of leadership of AlixPartners for quite a while now. Yeah. In fact, I'm hard pressed to remember a time when you weren't. So there must have been a time that you weren't, but you've been doing it. So I guess my question to you is, if you can share this, is how do you build something like you've done? How does the team build what you've built? How do you think about it? How do you guys go about taking AlixPartners from being a turnaround firm with quite successful, one of the top 1 or 2 or 3, to being this kind of international business?
It's funny when you think about it and you look back and you realize, just as you said, I started leadership at AlixPartners and I was made a partner in 2001, and 6 months in, we were small. We didn't have that many practitioners, but I was North American lead for the turnaround group, and then stayed in leadership. And then 3 years ago, moved to the region. And what that means is across all the different disciplines, geographically, the US and Asia. I think one of the things that Alex is really good at is building teams and thinking about like-minded people. We're very protective of our culture. We're very protective of how we go to market together, how we collaborate together, how we think about staffing an assignment and going client first. So I believe, not just with Alex, but with some of our competitors who've also been very successful, is thinking about the client and continuing with getting great results and building it one client at a time is a bit of the secret. We are, fierce about making sure we're thinking about collaboration. We have our core values on collaboration, common sense, making sure that we're developing the next generation and really thinking about and developing the next client. So we've done a little bit of M&A, but not as much as, say, FTI grew quite a bit. They're significantly bigger than us, but they did a lot of it through M&A. We've had, since I've been there, I think 4 acquisitions, and they've all been kind of tuck-in, somewhat small. The largest we just did was an automotive specialist firm in Germany, which is, as you know, that's where a lot of the automotive manufacturing comes out of. So, we think about organization, we think about delivering for clients, we think about hiring like-minded people, and, we're kind of relentlessly focused on it.
So you're the head of the Americas and Asia, right? How did that come about? I'm not necessarily, I didn't necessarily say, okay, if I'm responsible for the Americas, let me just go also be responsible for Asia. In fact, I think you just got back yesterday or this weekend from Asia, so I think you may still be on Asia time. But how did that come about? Because those aren't necessarily complementary geographies, or are they?
I think actually they are. A lot of what I've done in my career is large multinationals. And part of the reason why I made sense for the Asia bit is because Westinghouse was one of my more recent turnarounds, and they were owned by Toshiba. And what that meant was lots of travel and lots of focus on Japan, which is one of our growth vectors. So part of what we wanted to do was think about, look, I don't know how many of you have been to Asia, but you look at it and you think, oh, it's you can go over there and you can hit all the countries. Wrong. It's like 9 hours from Hong Kong to almost anywhere. It's vast. And the opportunity is amazing. So part of what we thought about was making sure we connected the core elements of doing large multinational transformations and pulling it in and making sure that the Asian practice was connected to the rest of the firm. That was really the thinking, is that we wanted to make sure, because both kind of literally and figuratively, they could be islands out there. And in fact, they kind of were. And COVID highlighted how isolated they were for us. Everyone knows what happened in China. Our Chinese folks were isolated, not just from us, but from each other. Japan, everybody was isolated. So when we started thinking about the organization and how we were going to pull people together, we decided having leadership of the Americas and Asia pull together so that we would caucus together. We would think about, deals together. We would think about staffing, and it is more natural than you think it would be.
So Dave, you and I have known each other for a long time, but I remember early on having lunch with one of your colleagues, another leader of the firm in New York, and I asked him how he would, how he kind of spent his days, and he's responsible for helping lead the investments of the firm, and his response was, and it won't matter what the dollar amount was at the time, but it was like, well, I wake up every day figuring out how we can generate X number of dollars for our investors, right? Without ever losing their money. And one of I think the things that I think is true, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Elliott has been maybe standing alone, that I don't know that it's ever lost money in a given year on a net basis for its investors. That it is, you've found a way to try to always, maybe the quantum is not big one year to the next, but somehow or other, despite the economic environment, you've been successful, and you sort of have to generate this cash amount, all the time, this value. How do you think about that? You're a leader of the firm now, but I knew you in your late 20s. As you've grown up in the firm, did I get that right? Number one, Elliott's kind of where they stood?
Almost right. We've been around 48 years, and I think in 3 of those years we've lost money, but it's always been a single-digit percentage, and the number of quarters that we've been negative is something like 20, over that period of time.
Over half a century.
Yeah, and so our goal is to never lose money, come what may, as we like to say, and there's just a lot of effort and energy and thinking that goes into that, a lot of risk mitigation, and I think it takes years and years typically for our investment professionals to kind of adopt the mindset that we want them to have, to be able to successfully, in a range of different environments, carry out that mission. And so it tends to be, we have the best success developing our talent from within, people that arrive at the firm in the first 10 years of their career, as opposed to 25, 30 or more years in. That can be a rough adjustment. Yeah, that is the goal, and it's all consuming.
So again, I'll ask, how do you do that? I mean, I guess I'm looking for the secret sauce here, because how do you, to get the kind of returns that Elliott has historically generated over the last 48 years, and to, and to get to make the amount of the quantum of cash you basically have to make every day. I mean, you start dividing it out, the dollars per hour that you have to click through is, kind of overwhelming, right? In order to be able to get those returns. To do that, you have to take risk. Right? You can't get the returns you all do without taking some level of risk, and yet you find a way to mitigate it in a way that if you've had 20 quarters out of, I don't know how many, 160 or 180 quarters where that you've had some challenges. How do you bring that together in an organization that has grown to the point your organization is? You have a lot of people now in a lot of places.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it has to do with the culture of the place, and even as we've grown, the core of the culture has remained largely unchanged. It's we emphasize attention to detail, hard work, tenacity, perseverance, and collaboration, as I said earlier, and working together. There's a lot of focus on mentorship of our younger folks, and we don't always get it right, but when we don't get it right, those are the ones that I think we spend the most energy on, actually, and I spend the most time thinking about the ones that are really challenged and are struggles. I probably spend as much or more time thinking about the investments that didn't go as we thought or hoped or intended, and it was a dickens of a thing just to get our money back, than I do about the ones that are 5 or 10x, and oh great, that kind of went as we underwrote, and then those are the ones that are kind of seared into your being, and I, in terms of our our rising talent, I'll directly say to them, it matters more to me that you dig this one out, than that you go and do 2 other ones. Like, show me you can dig this one out. It's not always easy, but I think most of the time, you usually can find a way. Rarely are the circumstances in the world so adverse, or have you so spectacularly screwed up the underwrite that you've found yourself in a completely unsalvageable situation. Many times it's just, that people don't want to be associated with the situation anymore. It's embarrassing. They don't want to talk about it internally. They'd rather focus on some other thing that's going well and make that the topic of conversation. Let's put capital into that one that's going well. I want to be around the table, discussing that one. But from an investment standpoint, that may not be what maximizes return, even though it might maximize the kind of emotional state or perception of that particular individual who may be leading the investment.
So Judge Isicoff, you have spent, you may be in, I will have to check the map, the southernmost district, in the United States, but from that seat, you've spent a lot of time thinking about, because I think one of the things that I hear Lisa talk about and Dave talk about is about culture and team, and and the value system, and things that people care about and are passionate about to make things true. I think sometimes people think about the bench, and they don't think about it in those terms. But as I've gotten to not only know you, but other friends, since I stopped practicing law 12 years ago, I've become my friendships with judges across the country become much deeper, because I get to talk to them about more things that I was able to do when I was practicing actively. And what's clear to me is that the judges care passionately about the bench and about the national bench and about the camaraderie and teamwork and teamsmanship. And, in my life, it's a funny story. I had the opportunity, I actually appeared in front of judges in 42 states. Not many people have done that. And I would show up and I always made a point when I would go into a place, I would make a point of affiliating with, not as local counsel, but as co-counsel and partners, the best lawyers I can find in that jurisdiction. Because I learned early on that when you show up someplace, in half the country, you're just a Yankee from the North, from the Midwest. You actually have to know people. And in doing that, you get to know the bar and you get to know the bench. And I remember stopping in one court in Oregon, and it never been before, and I walked in, the judge looked at me and said, "Oh, Mr. Butler, I know all about you," right? Because, yes, surprise, surprise, judges talk, right? And they check people out. But you've gone a long way, I think, from your seat here in trying to have, make a contribution, but have an influence on kind of the national bench. And I guess I'd ask you to talk a little bit about that. You've made contributions to the American College, to the National Conference, and other things. And I think it's useful with the group to share kind of, if you will, share the perspective of how judges work with each other and what you all care about and how you, and how you try to move the profession further and advance it.
Sure. Well, I'll start on the local level in that the judges, at least in the Southern District of Florida, and I know in most other districts, we work together to try to be as coordinated as possible in the manner in which we approach at least procedure, if not substance. Of course, I'm always right in what I decide, and most of the time my colleagues agree with me. But even when we can't, we try for the benefit of practitioners to keep our procedures as consistent as possible. Then I've had the privilege of serving many years. I've always been a member of the National Conference of Bankruptcy Judges since I became a judge. For those of you who've had the opportunity to go to our national meetings, we are called the National Conference of Bankruptcy Judges. What you go to is actually the annual meeting of the National Conference of Bankruptcy Judges. And I was told to make a plug. The National Conference of Bankruptcy Judges will be celebrating its 100th year anniversary in 2026. I am the chair of the committee. I can tell you, you're going to have an awesome time if you go to San Diego. Okay, now back to our regularly scheduled program. So in the National Conference of Bankruptcy Judges, we as a group part of our mission statement is to educate the public and to further and better the bankruptcy laws. And so we have a National Conference of Bankruptcy Judges Legislative Committee. We make ourselves available to legislators to provide answers to questions or inform members of Congress about issues that are important to the bankruptcy system. I know many of you here have participated in speaking to members of Congress about bankruptcy issues. I just came back from Washington and spent the entire day on the Hill on Thursday, dropping in on legislators. And these are another thing that we as bankruptcy judges try to do to better the bankruptcy system. Another thing is that we have educational programs on a national level. And of course, we see each other either at the annual meetings. Many of us participate in different conferences. Many of us are honored to be members of the American College of Bankruptcy. I see Judge Drain here. We were just together this weekend in Washington for that meeting. And again, we try to do things to better the system generally. We also have other initiatives that are very important to many and most of us, and that has to do with furthering and creating opportunities for everyone in the insolvency space, both through various diversity, equity, and inclusion committees. We have an active committee at the NCBJ. We have another active committee at the American College. We put on the federal judiciary. The Judicial Conference has its own initiatives that the judges are all involved with. Perhaps many of you heard of either the 2019 or the 2023 Roadways to the Bench. The latter is a program in which I had the privilege of co-chairing, in which we invite law students and practitioners. The first year it was 19 cities, the second year was 39 cities, to come and speak to judges about their pathways to the bench. And from that first program that we did, we actually had 10 new bankruptcy judges who participated in the first program. So judges around the country coordinate each other to improve the system of bankruptcy, whether it's legislatively, educationally, or through creating information opportunities so that we can create a more diverse insolvency community.
You mentioned Judge Drain, who is in the audience there. 20 years ago, right about now, marks the anniversary of the beginning of the Delphi bankruptcy case, which was the restructuring of the largest parts supplier in the world at the time, and something I helped lead with a team of colleagues at Skadden, the firm I retired from 10 or 12 years ago. And I bring this up because I want to talk a little bit about relationships, because I think one of the things, the message we try to make in this community is that relationships matter. They matter in a lot of different ways. They matter, I believe they matter between the bench and the bar, because I think the fact of the matter is that my perception is that that the bench tries to figure out in every deal, in every situation it's in front of, kind of who the honest brokers in the room are, in the courtroom are, and people, reputations do matter, and relations and things matter. But Judge Drain had the I don't know that you'd call it a privilege, but I'd say the privilege of overseeing the Delphi case. And that was really where Dave and I first became friends. Dave was involved, Elliott was involved in buying debt at the time and getting involved in the deal. We had a very complicated transaction where we had confirmed a phenomenal plan of reorganization that would have repaid creditors, and Appaloosa Management, David Tepper was going to put in $1.5 billion in equity, and all was rosy. And then Dave Tepper, someone who was also a friend who I respect to this day, made an economic decision saying, hey, I think he was doing this in 2006. He looked forward to 2007, kind of said, I don't think the automotive environment's as good as I thought it was going to be, and decided that he liked his liquidated damages provision in his contract a lot better than he liked the $1.5 billion in equity contribution. And so he stepped away, literally. Jay, Greg, and I and others at Skadden had a closing room of 100 people in it, and everyone showed up except the new equity. So it was a tough day. And we had to figure out how to go through round two, and showed up in front of Judge Drain and said, "Never mind, we'll sort this out. Give us some time, and we'll try to figure out what this is going through." And Dave then was a 20-something or early 30-something at Elliott. And as they were buying debt, he and I began to speak with each other and get to know each other. And the truth be known, without going into all the details, much of what happened in the rest of that transaction was based on a lot of conversations that Dave and I had, and trying to figure out from our various perspectives. I had one role, he had another role, how we could, try to get the world to come into a place where, and get people to do things they didn't necessarily want to do, to preserve value for the business. And at the end of the day, there was a second plan. Ultimately there was a transaction that, in what was the largest default in dip lender history, that turned into them putting another $1.5 billion into the business or whatever it was, and acquiring the businesses, which, and not a bad investment, by the way. There was that business, which was valued at the time of that. The first reorganization was supposed to be $15 billion. The second was like $4 billion. In fact, those businesses today are worth almost $30 billion, and people made a bunch of money along the way. But I will tell you, I don't know that would have happened in the way it happened, but for the relationships and the kind of things that Dave and others around the table, and there were some other folks in that small group that did that. Just like in the automotive restructuring, there were half a dozen, maybe a dozen people who played a very significant role of what was going on in Washington. And those relationships matter. People have to trust each other. And that's been true, at least in so many of the things that have been done with you, where, there are a lot of sidebar conversations. There's a lot of how do you, because these are complicated questions, right? There's no real good answer to some of this stuff. So a word about relationships. I mean, and that's played, I think, because I want to talk about mentors. So a word about your thoughts on those relationships, how they've been important in what you've done in leading your businesses. But then if each of you, I'd ask, could offer maybe, if you'd identify, I always sort of say, none of us get here without help. None of us get here without somebody or lots of other people making a difference in our lives. I'd ask if each of you would, maybe starting with you, Alyssa, talk about, who was a mentor in your life? Who was important to you? Who made a difference in helping you get to where you are today?
So the question is about mentors. Okay.
And relationships.
And relationships.
So all
So,
the personal side.
you talk about being in the room when a deal falls apart and looking around the room. So many of you, we've worked together over the years. And as you know, whether you're on the same side, whether you're on the opposite side, whether you're in front of a judge, integrity matters. And that's part of the relationship building. And it matters when you have to go and you have to ask someone to contribute something as part of a deal, or you have to ask them to back down, or you have to ask them to trust you that this is going to work and that these parties are going to do what they say they're going to do so that it's all going to work out. And that comes from, building your credibility and doing the right thing all the time, even when it's very hard. So I do think relationships matter when you have to come up with a consensual, equitable solution that nobody loves, but nobody feels cheated. As far as mentors, you mentioned Larry Ramakers, and I don't know how many of you know Larry Ramakers, but he was the first guy that I worked with at AlixPartners. And my first assignment at AlixPartners was I was CFO of Umbro International, which is the soccer company, which, by the way, still is probably one of my coolest deals ever, because Umbro had a box on the 50-yard line at Old Trafford in Manchester United, so that was pretty cool. But anyway, my relationship with Larry started out a little bit crazy because Larry was very particular about who he worked with, and I was super new, and he really didn't want to work with me. And the staffing guy at the time, and remember, we were a small firm. We only had, I was employee number 59. Larry wanted this one guy to come in as the CFO, and the staffing guy, a guy who's long since retired by the name of Bob Koval. I was in his room. It was my second day at AlixPartners, and he put Larry on speakerphone and didn't tell Larry that I was sitting there. So they got into this argument about staffing while I'm sitting there. And I'm just like looking at this guy like, what are you doing, man? I'm here. I can hear everything you're saying about me, both of you. And they're going back and forth. And then finally, Larry Ramakers goes, so you're telling me I have no choice. I can only take whatever her name is. And finally, I just interceded. I'm like, okay, this has to stop. I'm like, I'm right here. My name is Lisa. Do you want me on this assignment? This is absurd. And he just paused, and he's like, meet me at the airport in South Carolina, and hung up. So that was not awesome way to start your first assignment. The other thing that they did is I had never physically met Larry Ramakers, and I was supposed to meet this guy in the airport. So they decided to give me a picture of Larry Ramakers so I could find him in Charlotte International Airport. So they give me a picture, and at the time, the way that the AlixPartners website worked is it wasn't a headshot. They decided it was, for whatever reason, some marketing person decided it was more powerful to do the full body shot. So I had this little teeny picture of a full-on standing Larry Ramakers where his head was about this big. So I'm in the airport, new to the firm, looking at the picture, looking at every middle-aged man that vaguely resembled Larry Ramakers, and I'm like... So finally I walk up to him, and I'm like, hi, at the airport. Now, Larry Ramakers, being Larry Ramakers, thought that I was trying to pick him up. Not that I could possibly be the what's-her-name person who was going to be his staff. So he looked at me, and he's like, hi. Yeah, this really happened. So finally I was like, oh, for God's sake, I'm not trying to pick you up. I'm like, I'm Lisa Donahue. And he was like, oh. Like definitely not happy. But anyway, what started really inauspiciously turned out to be a wonderful relationship. And I learned so much from that man because he was super quirky, but he was one of the most talented practitioners that I've ever worked with. He co-founded the firm with Jay. He's long since retired. But what he was so great at is he would take the time to game play out how a call was going to go and how someone was going to react and think about what your next step was. And he would take the time with me and say, okay, we're going to have a really difficult call. These are the bondholders. They are structurally subordinate to the banks. They're really mad. So I'm going to say this. They're likely then going to say that. Then I'm going to come back with this. My goal is to get them here. And he would do that before these really important calls. So he was probably one of the most influential. I mean, look, there've been a lot. There've been a lot, but Larry will always have a special place in my heart because of the way our relationship started and where it ended. Actually, when he retired from the firm, I was one of the lucky ones. He had a lot of people that loved him, and I was one of the lucky ones that was able to speak about him at his retirement party.
Thank you. Laurel, relationships and mentors. Maybe hard to beat that one, but I just want to.
I do not have a story like that, so I'm not even going to try, but I am going to make an observation. And that is when Lisa was talking about the resistance that Larry had to working with a woman as opposed to a man. That is exactly the goals that we are trying to accomplish. There are incredible people, no matter what their gender, their race, or their religion. And if you just go out of your comfort zone and don't go with the person that you're used to being with, you can discover and create, and not create, but, mentor incredible people like Lisa. So as far as, and so that's relationships. Yes, relationships are very important. My mentors were my relationships. My first mentor really was Dan Pearson, the judge for whom I clerked. He was highly respected. When he retired, he was appointed special counsel for, I think his name was Ron Brown, who died in a plane accident. So Dan did not finish that assignment, but he was respected all over the world, and he helped me get my first legal job. And I was very fortunate then, as I mentioned, to have Chris Meyer as my mentor, who really, from Cleveland, championed me and helped me by bringing me up and sponsoring me and teaching me how to become a good bankruptcy attorney. And then after I came back, because I had to, I was very fortunate to start working with a friend of mine, John Kozak, and Chuck Throckmorton and Harley Tropin, who mentored me right through the time I went to the bench. So I've been very fortunate in my mentors. They've all given me different gifts. You heard there were no women in there. And that is really because as we as women in the insolvency space know, that in the late 1970s, the early 1980s, there really weren't a lot of women in the insolvency space. And so how lucky I was that I had good men who were willing to take me under their wing.
Just an aside on that, I had a chance to work with Judge Isicoff on a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission that is sponsored by the American College of Bankruptcy, and she and her co-chair appointed me to subcommittee to chair the action committee of the subcommittee, which is, those of you who know me, is my preferred mode. Let's take action. Let's do something. Let's not, if we're going to do it, let's do it. Let's not just talk about something. Let's actually make it happen. And one of the things we did to try to make the point, sometimes pictures are worth 1,000 words. And, Lisa's talking about early in her career. Laurel's talking about early in her career. I'm talking about a chart we put up just like 3 years ago, in which we, to make the point to a group of, esteemed people that are in the American College, who at the top of their profession, we said, okay, to give you a chance of what the challenges are we're facing on, here's a picture chart. We just used like pictures of, little, if it was a guy, we used a guy kind of a guy and an eye kind of a woman and that kind of thing. And we took the Chamber's global awards list or recognition list. And we took tiers 1, band 1, band 2, band 3, band 4, band 5, right? And in that year, you had to get to band 4 before you could find a woman. This was 2.5 years ago, right? And we all know that's not true, right, in terms of qualified, capable people. And you had to go, I think, other than one anomaly, I think you had to go to band 5 before you could find a person of color. And that's the point. The point that Laurel is sort of making here is, I just want to sort of share, that's today's reality. That's the reality in the last sort of 3 years. That's not something that is 20 years ago. And we need to think about, the admonition the judge said, we just sort of reach out and mentor people and find people out of our comfort zone, amazing things can happen. So with that, I'll just go to Dave, and Dave, ask you the same thing about relationships and mentors in your life.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree. Relationships are really important. I think often there's a misconception about Elliott, that we're like this saber-toothed tiger that's looking to rip people's heads off, or always seeking an opportunity to enforce our rights or stand on our legal rights. And really, that's not the case. We're generally looking for good investments in good businesses at the wrong price, too cheap. Sometimes we find our way into litigation-oriented situations, but it's not like part of a strategy. Rarely is it part of a strategy. We're generally looking to cut a reasonable commercial deal that advantages our investors. And if we're involved in litigation, it's because we couldn't find a way to do that, and it's sort of the last resort. And I think over time, people are slowly realizing that those types of situations are kind of not really integral to the identity of the firm, and we are looking to make and have good relationships outside the firm as well as within the firm. In terms of mentors, certainly Paul and John, Paul Singer being the founder of the firm, and John Pollock being with Paul, the co-CEO and co-CIO. And then before that, when I first joined the firm, Mark Brodsky, who went on to found Aurelius, he was the guy that hired me and taught me a great deal. I'd been at the firm maybe a week, 2 weeks. He said, "Hey, go look at this company." It was a silica and aggregates mining company, and let's talk about it in a week's time. So I spent a week, kind of beavering away, doing all the work I could. Go in to talk to him about the company. He asked me, "What do you think is going to happen? How are these different instruments, likely to fare? Is anything worth buying here?" And I gave him the most preposterously unsophisticated analysis. And then he said to me, "Well, let me tell you what I think is going to happen." And basically just described, without having spent the week of time, because of this, loophole in the indenture, there's likely to be a coercive exchange. He's describing basically a forerunner to the LME type transactions that are now very commonplace. And the things that he said, I hadn't even considered it, and it completely blew my mind. Anyway, I'd add him to the list as someone that I really, learned a great deal from. I mean, another thing he did was he asked me to, he involved me very early in my tenure at the firm in the Enron bankruptcy, which was a fascinating and sprawling, situation. And he said, "Every morning, I'd like you to send me a summary of everything relevant from the docket." This was before there were services that would summarize the docket for you. So I was that service for him. And I would read the entire docket every morning. It would often take me hours, to read it and then summarize it for him. But the learning that was, there were so many issues and complicated issues, and you got to see the briefing on both sides, and it was just a tremendously educational experience for someone kind of, just starting out in the business, especially someone who did not have a law degree. So it was almost like getting a law degree just by, reading all the things that we get filed in this, huge and complicated case. So I'd add him to the list alongside of John and Paul, as, really kind of helping to, bring me up in the business.
Well, I think appreciate that, Dave. And I think from those comments, one of the things that we all up here sort of acknowledge is that none of us got here by ourselves. Most of us have significant others in our lives that make a difference in our lives, that help us get to where we are, and those include mentors. And I think I'd like to finish this conversation today because we're up against our time limit, so I want to make sure we get everyone to the next place they need to be. But I want to finish with on the theme of mentorship. And this particular session is not only for this room and live stream, but it's also taped and will be repurposed by M&A Advisor for opportunities to share with a broader community. And so I'd like to end this with asking each of you, if you would, to talk about to the 20 and 30 somethings in the room, and who listen to this, what advice would you give them on, what are the one or two things or three things that you think can make a difference in sort of, getting along in that career path? What would you encourage somebody to do if they're sort of saying, how do I move myself forward? Because I know all of you mentor people. So from a spirit of mentorship, and Dave, I'm going to start with you and we'll come this direction. What would you say to that person, that man or woman, about, how you can advance your career?
Well, it sounds like neither you nor Judge Isicoff were convinced you wanted to go into the legal profession at the outset. I was kind of in the other situation. I thought I did want to become a lawyer. When I was in college, I was taking every class that I possibly could that was relevant to law. I decided that I wanted to take a year after school and basically use my last year at college to get my GPA high enough that I could, get into the best law school that I possibly could. And I was mostly interested in constitutional law at that time. And it's a very kind of narrow field, and it can be hard to do it if you can't go to certain institutions. And so it was really because my GPA wasn't high enough. Because I wasn't good enough. I couldn't do that in the way that I wanted to. So I had to find something to do for a year. It turned out to be, I looked at consulting, and I would post the letters that I received from the different consulting firms telling me that I wasn't good enough. One of them even said, it would be inappropriate to have further discussions with you.
That definitely was not us.
So put that one up on the bulletin board along with a bunch of other similar rejections. And then found a job as an investment banker in New York. I think similar to the themes I was hearing earlier from some of the other panelists, was that kind of unexpected, pathway that ended up leading me to a career that I really, really, enjoy, and it's just, kind of endlessly and fabulously challenging and interesting, and where I'm always learning, and I'm never fully on top of it, and I'm always trying to, kind of come back from mistakes and setbacks, and I think if things had gone as I envisioned, I hoped they would, I never would have had that experience. I would have been doing something I wasn't, necessarily as good at. And so I guess my advice would be, that life is long and you don't really know. It's not always evident, where your best path is. But if you, kind of keep doing your best, you're probably going to find it.
Judge Isicoff?
I have the privilege of teaching a professionalism class each year to the bankruptcy law school clinics. And I tell the students and I tell my interns and my law clerks that your reputation is the most important thing that you have to be successful in your career. And it goes to what Lisa was talking about with relationships. And I say to them, you have to guard your reputation. You need to earn it. But you need to guard that reputation because you need to get to a point and to be successful that your word is your bond. And without that, you are never going to be truly successful. And as hard as this is for young students to hear, and sometimes even adults, I always say that your reputation is more important than any client that you represent. So guard that as your most precious gold and the most precious commodity.
Lisa?
I think two things. Number one, and I always try to do this, is every assignment, regardless of what we're doing, and even kind of coming up through the ranks, sometimes some of the tasks that you have to do when you're paying your dues aren't as interesting as others. But always try to find something to learn, to find something interesting, whether it's a new industry, whether it's learning more about your colleagues, and recognizing that everybody's bringing something to the table that you can learn. And then second, and this is a little bit building on what David said, we all face setbacks. We do. It's life. It's humans. It's what happens. And thinking about some of the things that can feel disheartening, look at them as opportunities and think about, this just may not be my journey. This just may be, I need to do something different, and recognize that there's always another opportunity.
That from a story I sometimes share is when I got to my first law firm, and I'd gotten an offer after my first year of law school for permanent employment along with another fellow from my law school. And so we both knew at the end of our first year what we were doing at the end of our third year. So you got to tell you, for someone who didn't want to go to law school anyways, I had like zero motivation in my second and third years, and I had to figure out how to get through all that. But I got to the firm, and I got fired 18 months in, out the door. The other fellow is currently the CEO of that firm, that law firm. And oh, by the way, that law firm happens to be one of Birch Lake's principal outside counsel these days. So something went along the way. But I got sent away because I didn't fit the mold that they were looking for. They wanted a first-year associate to be in the library. I wanted to have clients and had clients, and I wanted to do things. And like Judge Isicoff talked about, where she said, there was this thing called the Bankruptcy Code that had just been passed, and people were talking about this. Well, I had the same experience. That was my generation. I ended up graduating around the time the Bankruptcy Code was in place, and I realized, even though I'd done no bankruptcy work, I hadn't taken any bankruptcy course, I realized that it was a broad new frontier, and I, for whatever reason, understood that it was going to fundamentally change the way capital markets worked in this country. That it was much broader than an insolvency statute. And I sort of said, that's what I'm going to go do. And I think the advice I give to young people is, don't be afraid of being fired from someplace where it's not a good fit for you. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the firm. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means there's not a good fit. And apropos of, 40 years later, that law firm is now, we work together every day on transactions, right? But what I do think is important is never, and this goes to a little bit of what Judge Isicoff said, never lose your North Star. Whatever your North Star is, be sure to pursue it and be passionate about it. And, I tell, in trying to offer young people that I mentor, be passionate and be reliable. If integrity goes without question, but you got to have integrity. But, be passionate, because that's what I think at the end of the day, if you listen to these stories we've had the privilege of hearing, we've had 3 very passionate people who have been extraordinarily successful in their careers because they're passionate even today about what they do every day. And I think that's what makes a difference, because life is tough and deals are tough and the world is tough sometimes. And we're obviously in a very challenging environment in the world we live in today. We're all trying to figure out what the next step is. So you got to be passionate. So be passionate and be reliable. People have to be able to know that, you're going to be for them there on, good days as well, bad days as well as good days, and that they can count on you. I think we'll probably all tell you that the most difficult person you have on your team is someone you're not quite sure whether you can rely on a particular day, right? You need to know that they're always able to be counted on. So, well, Laurel, Lisa, Dave, thank you for kind of sharing some of your backstories. Really look forward to it, and look forward to tonight when we can celebrate you more. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new from it. If you have any questions or comments for us or any of our guests, please feel free to leave them in the podcast platform of your choice, or send us an email at editor@maadvisor.com. We would love to hear from you and get your feedback. And if you haven't done so already, please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and subscribe to our M&A Alerts newsletter at the links in the description or on our website at www.maadvisor.com. This will help you stay updated on the latest M&A interviews and trends and support our podcast to grow and reach more listeners like you. This is Roger Aguinaldo, the creator and founder of the M&A Advisor. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our M&A Advisor community. Until next time, stay safe and happy dealing.